This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ephraim Graham. Just as Senate Republicans reach a tentative compromise with one woman accusing Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault, news of a second allegation. According to a report by The New Yorker, 53-year-old Deborah Ramirez says Kavanaugh exposed himself and forced her to touch his bare genitals when the two were freshmen at Yale. Ramirez says she was hesitant to come forward, questioning her memory, admitting she, Kavanaugh, and others in the room were heavily intoxicated at the time, but, quote, after 6 days of carefully assessing her memories and consulting with her attorney, she felt confident enough of her recollections. Turkish authorities are sending signals that Pastor Andrew Brunson could be released next month. The Wall Street Journal reports Turkish officials say a judge could free Brunson when he appears in court on October 12th, but only if the U.S. stops putting pressure on the country to send him back to the States. U.S. officials said that the Trump administration decided to ease off amid fear that Turkey's economic difficulties could spread to other emerging markets. Here now is a quick look at some of the other major stories we're following for you today inside the CBN newsroom. Senior Republicans are advising President Donald Trump to push pause on firing Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. According to a New York Times report, Rosenstein suggested to now former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe to wear a wire when meeting with the president. He also suggested removing the president from office. Senator Lindsey Graham and House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes are cautioning against firing Rosenstein for now. They say the president should not fire him unless he believes he's lying. Meanwhile, the president plans to confront the dangers posed by North Korea's nuclear threat at the United Nations for the second time. The president will address the General Assembly Tuesday, and on Wednesday he will chair the Security Council. It is reported the president plans to use this session to discuss North Korea and the topic of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Vice President Mike Pence is warning evangelicals not to be complacent during this year's midterm elections. He shared the message this weekend at the Family Research Council's Voter Value Summit. Pence said complacency is the greatest threat to Republicans keeping control of Congress. He added the midterm elections are a, quote, choice between a party that celebrates America and one that demeans millions of our neighbors and friends. You know, our founding fathers shaped our nation, but what do you know about what shaped them? See why history lessons are so important to Americans today. When we celebrate leaders who helped to make America great, it is important to remember men like George Washington joined a remarkable group steeped in an education and faith that helped to create this free nation. But as Paul Strand reports, many of today's students aren't learning about the true forces behind these leaders.
When you look at the miracle of the American Revolution, a critical combination was God's timing plus the leaders chosen to carry it out. Teaching about the intense education and deep curiosity of our founding fathers is author Jenny Cody's passion.
They studied ancient civilizations, and I don't mean just like AP history, you know, and dates and facts and stuff. They studied how governments work. They studied ancient Rome, ancient Greece. They studied philosophy, how men thought.
Cody wrote The Voice, the Revolution, and the Key to better connect our younger generation with America's founders.
My life's purpose is to get kids excited about history and make them fall in love with it.
In this book, the author uses talking animals to help the future leaders when they're children. One is a young Benjamin Franklin reading in depth about ancient leaders' character, virtues, and vices.
Plutarch's Lives, Benjamin Franklin, 11 years old, that was his favorite book. Have you read Plutarch's Lives? I just read it to write this book, and it's pretty complicated.
Young George Washington wrote in longhand 110 principles put together by Jesuits about how to live right and be a gentleman.
What 12-year-old today do you think would take the time to have a journal and to handwrite out rules of civility and civil discourse? I mean, he wrote down these principles so he would learn them.
Colonial society at this time was pretty much based on the lessons and literature of Christianity.
Children were learning their ABCs based on Bible characters.
Today's public schools not only don't teach out of the Bible, they don't teach how important Christianity was to most of the founding fathers. Or they suggest founders like Washington and Thomas Jefferson were deists, believers in only a distant and uninvolved God.
Yet Washington stated after surviving a battle where his coat was punctured by numerous bullets and 2 horses were shot dead beneath him, I was saved by the miraculous care of Providence that saved me beyond human expectation. Patrick Henry, the man who shouted, "Give me liberty or give me death," stated, "There is a just God who presides over the destinies of nations." As a young man, Patrick Henry was right in the middle of the First Great Awakening and the battle for greater religious liberty in the colonies.
The war for religious freedom was happening under his own roof.
Henry's father and uncle were Anglicans in Virginia's state church.
However, his mother, Sarah, was a bit of a rebel, and she went with this new Great Awakening dissenter movement.
She would take her son to hear evangelists preach in this first national revival. The experience helped form him into the mighty orator eventually labeled the Voice of the Revolution. His voice for freedom and stand against the high taxes of the Stamp Act helped ignite the revolution.
A decade before we even declared independence, he was the first one to speak up against tyranny. That's when Sam Adams and the boys and the Sons of Liberty was like, look at these guys in Virginia. We need to be that bold. And so isn't it amazing how one voice speaking up for liberty against tyranny can change the world?
And he joined many bold leaders educated for just that moment in time.
They understood that liberty is precious because it had been oppressed, over the centuries, and they studied it. And so because they studied what worked in history, they could smell a tyrant coming 3,000 miles away, and they were ready.
While Cody also points out their failures, like Patrick Henry owning slaves.
I'm showing his struggle with slavery. Where he says it's a lamentable evil. I cannot justify it. I cannot believe I'm a Christian, yet I do this. There's no excuse.
But she finds it horrible that schools are shying away from teaching the great and good stories of America's first decades and its founders just because of their dark side.
To the point where I heard recently that some school curriculums are going to start teaching in 1866. Oh, let's just skip over the whole founding of our nation, because it's too painful.
Cody holds patriot camps with kids and often asks what will happen if children don't learn their nation's history.
I said, we'd lose our future. And I said, whose responsibility is it to keep telling the stories of our history? And you know what they said? It's ours. So if kids are willing to own it, let's just teach it to them.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Still ahead, the healthy eating plan ripped straight from the Old Testament. We're going to show you the Bible's 7 superfoods next. The Jewish time of Sukkot, or Feast of Tabernacles, is beginning its week-long celebration. During this time, Jewish people eat what are known as the 7 species of the Bible. CBN's Scott Ross went to Jerusalem for a cooking course using those 7 superfoods of the Bible.
This is the city of David. My wife Nedra and I met a famous Israeli known as the Queen of Kosher, and the kosher Rachel Ray. She is Jamie Geller, mother of 5 and founder of the Kosher Media Network.
How large an area does this encompass?
It's an 11-acre area. This is biblical Jerusalem, the city of David, and you'll notice it's outside of the old city walls, right? So the city of David, Jerusalem, Israel, it brings people together. It does. Much like food. So now I'm going to show you one of my favorite recipes, the 7 superfoods of the Bible and a special salad. How about that?
Great.
I brought Nedra along because she's the real cook in the family.
She feeds me. She's a very good cook, but we know nothing about kosher food and kosher cooking.
Kosher refers to biblical and traditional Jewish dietary laws. They prohibit some foods like pork and shellfish and don't allow mixing meat and dairy products in the same meal. But we learned it's tasty all the same.
The way that I cook is quick and kosher, okay?
Right.
So that means it's easy, anyone can do it, and all I need are people that like to eat. We love to eat. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. And what's special here, forget about kosher, we're doing a recipe inspired by the 7 species, the 7 foods that are superfoods of the Bible and of the land of Israel.
Superfoods.
Yeah.
Will this make me a super person,
It will
man?
make you strong like Popeye, it'll make you healthy, your doctor will be happy, your wife will be happy, you'll eat good.
The 7 species come from the book of Deuteronomy, which says the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey.
Shivat Haminim, which translates to mean the 7 species. So this is the Shivat Haminim salad. Okay, fine. So we're going to start by our wheat that we're going to use is bulgur. So would you mind to help me, Nedra?
Sure. What would you like me to do? Just
Put that right in here. And yes, into a hot pot, we're going to put a little bit of oil, just a touch. You make bulgur like you would rice. So you toast it up just a little bit in a hot pot. Now, this is the magic of television, right? We got a finished thing right there.
We did it.
Before we get to toss it all together, we're going to make our dressing. So you want to help a little bit, Scott and Edra? Here, we have olive oil.
Okay, do you want the whole?
Please, put it all in. Okay, this is a little Dijon mustard. That's just for a little flavor, right?
Loves mustard.
Right, okay, fine.
Okay.
So Dijon's good. Now, what we have here is one of the special foods of the lands of Israel. Date honey. Dates are one of the sweetest fruits in the world. Tons of fiber. That's what we're talking about, these superfoods. And date honey has been used for thousands of years to sweeten things naturally. A little red wine vinegar, right? Because grapes and wine, they can do it. We got a little bit of, right, salt and pepper. Okay, now we whisk. Who wants to whisk for me?
We can whisk.
Okay, whisk it up.
Well,
Mr. Ross.
Okay,
gorgeous.
How
You did a
long do
great
you
job.
whisk?
That's it.
Yeah, it's good. Emulsified, nice, so everything's emulsified. You don't want to see any chunks of Dijon anymore. So that just pulls that together. So now, before we assemble our salad, I just want to show you, right, this is dried dates.
Okay.
And then you
Now.
just slice your dates like this.
Okay.
Okay, fine. So that's how we deal with our dates. You can use fresh or dried figs, but I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of
Okay,
that.
good.
Would you please, Scott, bring over
The
the
beautiful.
beautiful serving
Yes.
plate. Then we can set
All right.
our bulgur, right, is going to be
Right.
the base of our salad. So we're going to put on our dates. They're a little sticky. So you'll excuse me, you want to help me?
Okay.
I put in the
Okay.
grapes, the superfood, the grapes, right? They've got lots of antioxidants. When pomegranates are in season, we would use the seeds of a pomegranate. Here we've got our figs, another one, right? Right out of the Bible, onto our beautiful
they look
salad.
like anchovies.
Right, you said that. That's not one of the superfoods, but if you like, we can put it on, you know? So we pour on our dressing on top, right?
Okay.
And it's beautiful, right? It's a nice
Yeah, it's
salad.
really nice.
But now look at it. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
They think
The
you're in the
power
kitchen
of a little
forever.
green. Yeah, totally. It looks like we worked hard on this.
Yeah.
How long did that take us, guys?
5 minutes.
Okay, would you like to taste?
Of course.
Okay, so let's share this together, right?
Okay.
Shall we? A little for you.
Okay.
A little more, Hardy. They got a spoon over there.
Okay.
A little for you, Miss Nedra.
Thank you, dear.
I want you to get all
Boy,
of the
this is looking
superfoods.
good.
It smells nice,
yeah.
it's fresh. So shall we?
Yes, we shall.
Okay. God bless this and help me.
Amen. Do you like? It's different, right? Enjoy. I'm so happy that you like. And right now you're eating a superfood salad with foods from the Bible that's delicious and good for you. So like that's like the best combination.
boy, oh boy.
Well, I wanted to give you guys a present. Can I do that?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay.
I have a new book
Wonderful.
called Joy of Kosher, Fast, Fresh Family Recipes.
I may end up going
So
kosher. You
therefore-
never know.
Well, you know what? You don't have to be kosher
Yeah,
to love
right. I
kosher.
understand
So
that.
in
Right,
theory,
yeah.
this was a kosher salad, but come on, it was
Right.
delicious,
Right.
you know?
It looks beautiful.
And there are lots of wonderful Israeli recipes in here, hummus, falafel, there's a lamb kebab spiced with cinnamon, cumin.
Wonderful.
Right.
And so don't be scared it's kosher, don't be scared it's Israel, don't be
Right.
scared. You know, I try Italian recipes, I try Indian recipes,
Right.
let's do it. Let's
Yeah.
get together around food.
Scott Ross, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Let's get together around food. Stay with us. We'll be right back. If your church sings worship music, chances are there are a few tunes from Hillsong on the congregation's lips every single Sunday. The Australian church has provided the soundtrack for churches around the world for many years. Last week, church leadership announced plans to form its own denomination, pulling away from Australia's largest Pentecostal denomination. Pastor Brian Houston says with Hillsong's growth around the world, it needs to be able to credential its own pastors and structure the church in a way crucial to the progress of its mission. I sat down with Houston in Studio 5 to talk about the ups and downs of living, loving, and leading.
The power of love.
More than 20,000 people attend services at Hillsong Church on any given Sunday, with campuses in Sydney, Kiev, Moscow, New York City, London, Cape Town, Paris, and so many more. And leading the worldwide flock is global pastor Brian Houston, who shares some of the journey in his book, Live, Love, Lead.
Why this book? What made you want to write this book?
Well, I think the book's been in my heart for a long time. I have been pastoring for 32 years, same church, 40 years, preaching and ministering, and I just felt like there was a lot in me I wanted to use to help other people, equip other people. So the timing right now just seemed to be the right time. I had the time to actually write the book. And so live, love, lead. That's where I am.
Houston and his wife Bobby first started Hillsong in 1983, meeting in a school hall and then a warehouse with only 45 members. It grew to 900 people in 4 years and continues to multiply. This church isn't the church you started 40 years ago.
That's for sure. No, we started in a little school hall in the outer suburbs of Sydney. In those days, it was like green fields where we were. And we were in a small hall, as I say, and it is an amazing story. I mean, it's a miracle.
Did you envision this? I remember reading, and you and your wife dating in a car that backs down into someone's house, essentially, because you forget to put it in park. Is this what you guys talked about all those years ago?
We really could not have imagined all that God has done. My wife and I both grew up in New Zealand. The story you're talking about in the book is our neighbour who used to go to the tiny little Assemblies of God church we went to, had a very steep drive, and so we were parked at the top of their drive and just talking about the future and planning, and yeah, you got to read the book to see the rest. But I've got to tell you that we did have in our heart to serve God and to believe to do something significant, but the grace of God has been something we could never have perceived.
What's been the toughest part of those 40 years for you?
Well, I talk in the book about the worst day of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was 45, it was in 1999. My father was my absolute hero. In fact, he was one of my great inspirations in terms of what I do today. And at 45, one of the guys who works for me came into my office and we went through our normal list of things to talk about. And at the end, he said, there's just one more thing. And so the way he said it, the tone, I knew something was wrong. And he told me that we'd had a complaint come in that many years before that, probably in the 1970s, that my father had abused a young man. So, yeah, I mean, you couldn't hit me with worse news. It sort of hit me in layers. And so I had to confront my own father and ask him about that. So that definitely is the worst day of my life.
How did that resolve itself? I can't even imagine navigating that.
I don't know whether it has resolved itself as such. My father now has been dead for over 10 years, but the ramifications of that are still playing out right now.
What lessons did God allow that to teach you?
You know, one thing I do know is it wasn't me. I didn't do anything wrong. It was my father. And, you know, in the world we live, there's some people who would love to try and frame me by my father's sin. But I refused to let that happen. But I guess it helped me to realise that everyone has their issues, has their battle, whatever that is. And that's why I think everyone is a perfect recipient for the gospel of Jesus, the grace of God.
Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders.
And with more than 40 recordings to their credit, music is a Hillsong signature. Their contemporary Christian praise songs are the Sunday soundtrack for churches around the world.
When many people think of Hillsong before they even think of the church and your ministry now, the music is so far-reaching. What do you think? I mean, are you a musician? What do you?
I was the church drummer when I was a teenager. Compared with the people today, no, I'm not a musician. But I always had a heart to pastor the kind of church that was an inspiration to churches. I'm a great believer in the potential of the church, and I mean the local church. And so I always kind of wanted to have a church where we wrote and sung songs that helped the church. And so it's an amazing thing because been through various personalities over all these years, but really from the start, it seems the songs from our church struck a chord with people, firstly in Australia, obviously, and then globally. And it's been a miracle story. Someone once said to me, Brian, you realise this is only a season. They're talking about the impact of the worship from Hillsong. And I agree, it's only a season, but so far it's been a very long season.
A long season indeed. Time now for your Monday motivation. I pray this message will inspire you and jumpstart your work week. No one can stop what God has promised. You must push past the obstacles that arise during the process. With that word, I encourage you to make this indeed a marvelous Monday. That concludes this half hour of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. And of course, we would love to hear from you. We want to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can always do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as Instagram. Thank you so much for joining us. This concludes the newscast, but the news continues 24/7 at cbnnews.com. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a marvelous Monday and a wonderful week. You have everything you need to do so. It is certainly God's desire for you. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you back here next time.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ephraim Graham. Just as Senate Republicans reached a tentative compromise with one woman accusing Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault, there's news of a second allegation. According to a report by The New Yorker, 53-year-old Deborah Ramirez says Kavanaugh exposed himself and forced her to touch his bare genitals when the two were freshmen at Yale. Ramirez says she was hesitant to come forward, questioning her memory, admitting she, Kavanaugh, and others in the room were likely heavily intoxicated at the time. But, quote, after 6 days of carefully assessing her memories and consulting with her attorney, she felt confident enough of her recollections. Here now is a look at some of the other major headlines we're following for you today inside the CBN newsroom. Senior Republicans are advising President Donald Trump to push pause on firing Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. According to a New York Times report, Rosenstein suggested to now former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe to wear a wire when meeting with the president. He also suggested removing the president from office. Senator Lindsey Graham and House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes are cautioning against firing Rosenstein for now. They say the president should not fire him unless he believes he is lying. Vice President Mike Pence is warning evangelicals to not be complacent during this year's midterm elections. He shared that message this weekend at the Family Research Council's Voter Values Summit. Vice President Pence said complacency is the greatest threat to Republicans keeping control of Congress. He added the midterm elections are, quote, choice between a party that celebrated America and one that demeans millions of our neighbors and friends. President Donald Trump will address the United Nations this week. The president recently cut funding to Unruh, the United Nations Relief and Workers Agency. It's the UN's body responsible for Palestinian refugees. Now, while there has been uproar over that decision, critics of Unruh point to its education system. They claim it could be encouraging a new generation of terrorists. Julie Stahl brings us a look at those claims.
This lady with a Palestinian scarf appears harmless, right?
But who is this? Dalal al-Mughrabi, who led a terrorist attack and murdered 38 people, including 13 children, on the coastal road of Israel in 1978.
Her picture appears in the 5th grade Arabic language textbook. It's part of a 4-page lesson that hails Mughrabi as a martyr who painted with her struggle a picture of challenge and heroism. The text in front of us provides a glance on the path of her struggle.
In these 4 pages, they're praising her and saying what a hero she was and how the younger generation needs to act exactly the same as she did.
Israeli Knesset member Sharon Haskell and David Badin of the Israel Resource News Agency spoke to journalists about reforms they believe need to happen.
Some of the major problems with UNRWA are perpetuating the conflict and perpetuating the hatred and the violence between Palestinians and Israelis.
CBN News asked UNRWA about the textbooks and education system. In a written statement, spokesman Christopher Gunnis told us, UNRWA teaches in accordance with UN values and principles. By convention, we teach the curriculum of host countries, i.e. the PA curriculum in the occupied territory. We review every book we use. We check for gender bias, age appropriateness, and political neutrality. On average, we have found less than 3% of the pages we have reviewed to be problematic. We have frameworks and procedures for supporting our teachers in dealing with these passages in the books. There are 515,000 Palestinian children in the UNRWA school system. Badin says if even 2% take up the terror challenge, that would create more than 10,000 terrorists. Badin sees other issues with UNRWA.
UNRWA is different from any other refugee organization because other refugee organizations help people get on with their lives. UNRWA, as a policy, teaches the concept of the right of return by force of arms.
That so-called right of return is also exaggerated by the very definition of Palestinian refugees.
UNRWA's got a completely different refugee definition than any other international organization. In UNRWA, a refugee status can be inherited, which means that they do not fulfill their basic agenda for what they were created for. It continues to build bigger and bigger refugee camps, give them permanent housing, give them permanent health care, give them a permanent education system. This is the role of a country, not a relief agency.
Haskell and Badin hope that President Trump's action to cut funding will force UNRWA to make changes. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Turkish authorities are sending signals that Pastor Andrew Brunson could be released next month. The Wall Street Journal reports Turkish officials say a judge could free Brunson when he appears in court October 12th, but only if the U.S. stops putting pressure on the country to send him back to the United States. U.S. officials said the Trump administration decided to ease off amid fear that Turkey's economic difficulties could spread to other emerging markets. Bill Cosby will be back in a Pennsylvania courtroom today for the first day of his sentencing hearing. Cosby was found guilty in April for 3 felony counts for drugging and sexually assaulting Andrea Constand back in his home in 2004. The television star and former comedian has maintained any sexual encounters with Constand and other accusers were consensual. Cosby is facing up to 30 years behind bars, but the judge could send him home on house arrest. Major flooding remains a threat in North Carolina more than a week after Hurricane Florence made landfall in South Carolina. More evacuations were ordered as rivers continue to rise. National Weather Service data also showed 5 of North Carolina's river gauges at major flood stage and 5 others at moderate flood stage. Parts of Interstate 95 and 40 are expected to remain underwater for at least another week or more. Environmental officials said they are closely monitoring where Florence's floodwaters have submerged coal ash sites. Federal government numbers show 200,001 new jobs were created last month, and there's been other promising economic news of late. I recently spoke with free market policy analyst Phil Kerpen with American Commitment about what this means for your wallet. Phil, how significant is the latest jobs report and other economic news, and what does it mean in the everyday life of Americans?
Example of that. Right now, we've got an unemployment rate that's lower than the economic growth rate, which is pretty rare. It last happened about 10 years ago. And that means that things are sort of moving forward on a really strong economic basis. And I would also point out that this latest jobs report also has pretty strong wage growth, 2.9% wage growth. We'd like it to be even higher, but we may finally be seeing earnings accelerate. And that's really exciting for people who are not looking for work necessarily, but want to make more in the job they're in.
What about concerns over trade disputes?
Well, that's kind of the one area of economic policy that is kind of weighing us down right now. We've got very good news economically on deregulation and on tax reform, not as much on the trade front, where we're seeing a lot of these tariff threats and escalation with China and the stalled negotiations on NAFTA, although we have had a recent breakthrough with Mexico, and if Canada comes to the table, we might finally have a deal soon. But that's introducing a lot of uncertainty, especially the threat of auto tariffs, which the president has raised, which would make cars a lot more expensive. So the president's playing a very high-stakes game on the trade area. If he can pull off new deals that are better than the ones they replaced and kind of put everything back together. That'll sort of be the all clear sign, I think, and then you'll see the economy take off even more because that source of anxiety will be relieved. But if we continue to see escalating tariffs and we don't have a resolution on these trade issues, that could threaten and even undermine the economic progress that we're seeing. So that's the big question mark right now, is how the trade issues get resolved.
Phil, many analysts say the president should be spending more time talking about the economy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it certainly is it certainly is a great success story for him to tell, and to the extent he can have a little bit more message discipline, talk a little bit more about the strong economy and a little less about just whatever random stuff he's tweeting about, that would probably be a positive politically. I also think it's critical going into the elections this year that President Trump remind everyone that Democrats will disrupt the good economic news that we have right now, and they'll move us in the other direction. They'll steeply raise taxes, put a bunch of regulations back in, kind of undermine the things that he's accomplished on that. And I think that from a political standpoint, it's even more important to remind people of the bad things that Democrats will do than it is to take credit for the good things we're seeing right now, because people are always more motivated by fear than they are by being grateful for what they have.
In light of all the chatter out there and all the issues we see, how big of an influence do you think the economy will have on the midterm elections?
Well, I don't know. I think that normally with the economy as strong as it is, you would expect the incumbent party to do really, really well. That's not what we're necessarily seeing in the polling right now. And so, there are a lot of factors this year that make it sort of different than a typical year. But obviously, to the extent that Republicans can get people to focus on the economy, that would be a really good strategy for them because the economy is so strong right now.
All right. Phil Kerpen with American Commitment. Thank you so much for your insights.
My pleasure.
Coming up, preventing bullying will show you what you need to know to keep your children safe. With school back in full swing now comes a lot of learning and fun for children, but they can also feel a lot of stress, and that can be especially dangerous outside of the classroom because of bullying. And sometimes that bullying can even lead to suicide. CBN's Mark Martin talked with one expert about the technology that is out there to help your children.
Here to discuss this very real problem is Titania Jordan, the Chief Parent Officer of Bark, an internet safety tool. Ms. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, these are tragic stats. There have been more than 1,300 children ages 5 to 12 who took their lives in America, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And your group has documented helping prevent at least 33 suicides among young people. Talk about that.
That's correct. Yeah, it's an honor to be able to work in technology that helps families, helps parents, and keeps children safer online. And so what we've done at Bark is to alert parents when their child has exhibited signs of suicide, depression, and anxiety. And 33 times we have sent an alert. The parent has received the alert and written back to say, thank you so much. Because of this alert, I was able to step in and get my child the help they needed.
Youth suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people ages 15 to 24 in the United States, according to kidsdata.org. Are parents aware of how great this problem is and how it can start with cyberbullying?
I don't think parents are fully aware until it happens to their child. I think we as a society need to understand that close to 75% of children are experiencing cyberbullying these days. It's just a function of the fact that they all have a device by the time they are 13, basically. And not only are they being cyberbullied, but they're also cyberbullying. And so it's a very stark reality. It's not just happening in a vacuum.
How do programs like Bark help? Break it down for us.
Sure, yeah. So the way Bark works is that you go to www.bark.us, you connect your child's social media accounts, email accounts, texting accounts, and then our artificial intelligence will run in the background to look for those things like cyberbullying, sexual content, thoughts of suicide and depression, potential drug use, online predators, and drug use. And then we will alert parents via text or email when our AI has detected something like that, which is, it's scary. And then we will send parents best recommended next steps for how the heck to deal with this.
You say Bark inspires trust between parents and children. How are children included in this process, and why do you think they should be?
Absolutely. You know, it's a fine line between parenting, helicopter parenting, and then raising responsible digital natives that can tackle the world on their own when they turn 18. And so what we do at Bark is that we don't give parents full unfettered access to every account and every device because we liken it to the diary analogy. You know, you don't want your parents reading your diary when you're a teenager. That said, we are given these children by God, and we need to raise them right. And so we need to know what's going on in their digital lives so that we can help protect them. And so on that note, we will not give full unfettered access to parents, but we will also alert them when there are things that they need to know so that we can inspire trust between parent and child, and honestly encourage conversations. Parents and children need to be talking frequently about what is happening not only in their real life, but in their digital life. If they're playing Fortnite, if they're on Snapchat, you need to be talking about it at the dinner table because that is their real life.
All right, Tanya Jordan with Bark. We appreciate your insights and commend your efforts.
And coming up right now, we're going to sit down with our friends at FaithWire to talk about what is trending. Stay with us. Justin Bieber wows worshipers in London, and the odd story of a homeless man shaving on a commuter train. Both stories are trending online this week. Jessica Chaco turns to FaithWire's Dan Andros to tell us more.
Well, our first story this week follows Justin Bieber. The recently engaged megastar surprised Londoners when he began singing a worship song outside of Buckingham Palace. Dan's here with us. Dan, tell us more about this story.
Yeah, so Justin Bieber was out in London with his new fiancée, Hailey Baldwin, and he's going back to his roots, started busking, opened up the guitar case and just sort of started jamming right there on the streets. And he hasn't performed a concert, like an official concert, in over a year. But here he decided to do an impromptu one, and a lucky few people were around to catch it. But once again, he was putting his faith on display, and he was singing a worship song. Good, Good Father was one of the songs he sang to the people who just happened to be around.
Dan, Justin has always been open about his faith, but it seems that he's become increasingly bold in the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's really interesting because he's been famous since he was a youngster, really young, and he's still only 24 years old. So we kind of forget that he's really still pretty young, but we've seen him mature in his faith and definitely become more open about it. After the Manchester shooting, they went back and did a benefit concert in Manchester. And one of the things he said to the crowd there, thousands and thousands of people, was that God was still good, even in the midst of evil like this. And I just thought that was a very powerful message to send, and a brave message to send, because if we're being honest, that a lot of young people are rebelling against God right now. And that's a difficult sort of theological message to bring, but a necessary one for people to hear. So we're seeing him make more and more bold moves like that.
Now, you mentioned earlier his fiancée. Are you sure it's still his fiancée, or is it possible that they have already gotten married?
Well, that rumor started because Alec Baldwin, who obviously is now, I guess, the uncle. So he actually mentioned and said, well, they went off and got married. And so everyone's like, wait a minute, they went off and got married. So there's conflicting reports now. Hailey Baldwin herself tweeted out that, no, we didn't get married, but she deleted that tweet. And so right now, the only source we have saying they're married is Alec Baldwin. TMZ and others are still standing by that they actually haven't gotten married yet. But I guess time will tell, and we'll see what happens in the coming days and months.
Well, it's inspiring to see his journey of faith, and we wish him and Hailey all the best. Well, you've probably seen this next story trending on Facebook or Instagram. It's a video of a homeless man shaving on a train. Well, that video went viral and sparked a lot of controversy. Dan, why has this video gained so much criticism?
Well, it's interesting. I ride New Jersey Transit, the same train that this guy was filmed on, and his name's Anthony Torres, and he was filmed shaving. And you see a lot of crazy things when you ride mass transit for a lot of times. So I think people were just like, oh, here's the latest, craziest thing that happened. And he was shaving. And what really put it over the top was he flicked it on the ground. So he flicked his shavings on the ground, the shaving cream, which was kind of, not a very nice thing to do, not a very polite thing to do. So people were criticizing him for that. But it turns out he's actually struggling with homelessness, and he was just trying to find a spot to shave because he didn't really have one. So the initial criticism maybe kind of taught everybody a lesson that maybe you should try to jump in somebody else's shoes before you start going out and making fun of somebody, for what they're doing on the train, because you don't know what your mindset's like when you don't have a home.
Absolutely. And after receiving a lot of criticism, actually the story does come with a happy ending. A GoFundMe campaign was started to help Torres, and so far they have raised over $38,000 in 2 days, exceeding their goal. Back to you.
That's good news and good word. Stay with us. We'll be right back with an encouraging word for you. We'll be right back. Regent University now ranks in the top 11% of universities in the country. That number comes from a U.S. News and World Report, which ranks 1,800 other schools nationwide. It is the first time in the school's 40-year history that it's ranked this high. The National Universities category includes top Ivy League schools and other universities. Regent is among only 8 Virginia schools in the National Universities ranking, including University of Virginia, William & Mary, and Virginia Tech. Right now, it is time for your Monday Motivation, and I leave you with this thought. It is a great day to dream again. The God who began a work in you stands ready to complete it. So dust off that old dream you've long forgotten and dream new dreams as well. You are not too old, and it is not too late. If you are breathing, God is not done with you, and your work on this earth still lies ahead. So I encourage you to dream again today, and then do the work and watch God work to make it happen for you. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. And we'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a marvelous Monday, everybody. We'll see you right back here come tomorrow. Goodbye and God bless.